Welcome to Diverse Joy, a podcast that infuses science, practical skills, and most of all, joy into diversity discussions. My co-host is the springy and gay-terrific, because she's wearing a lovely gator necklace, Dr. Amber Nelson.
Yes. And my co-host is the Joker-esque in his green and purple outfit, Dr. William Cox.
And rounding out our green and purple trio is the chic, funny, and smart Sandy Eichel coming back to be a guest again. We're so happy you came back for season
welcome
2.
Back.
Glad to be here.
By way of additional introduction, they are a wealth management advisor, a public speaker, the lead singer of a rockin' band, One Note and the Rhino. And welcome, Sandy.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So happy to have you again.
So, Sandy, as you know, we always start off talking about things bringing us joy. So what is bringing you joy this April?
Well, it's the beginning of spring, and my favorite thing is just like feeling the earth change and watching the little bulbs, the first flowers that come up, you know, the tulips, the daffodils, and they're just like popping through the earth. And then there's that almost atomic green color that comes out that is just, and I love that. It gives me energy.
Yeah, wonderful.
I love that. You know, for me, is very similar. I'm jumping in. I'm just jumping straight in. No, but the flowers, I totally agree. One of the things that I've been doing is I recently got my certification in eco-psychology, right?
Wow.
So the connection of our wellness to the earth, right? And there's a whole lot of pieces to it, and kind of decolonizing the ways in which we interact with the earth. Environmental justice, and really reclaiming spaces, especially for oppressed groups and marginalized folks that have kind of been disconnected to it. But that has also been something just like really rearranging, or not, kind of recentering my eyes onto like the nature around us, and like especially springtime is such a beautiful time to see new life and new growth and things like that. So I love that.
Right on.
I love it. Yeah. So my joy specifically,
what's your joy, Amber? What's bringing you joy?
My joy is similar. There's in Oregon, one, it's just naturally beautiful. So if you've never been, you need to come out and visit. It's gorgeous. But there's tons of flower farms. So there's like a tulip festival in April, and there's a farm in Salem that's a peony farm, and peonies are like my favorite flower.
I love
They're
peonies.
just so beautiful, especially even before they're fully bloomed and open, and they're these huge
layers.
buds and all of these layers, and just seeing them. And so going to the farms and just seeing all of the different types of peonies and colors and flowers, or the tulip festival is just,
take me with you.
Next, you'll have to come. You'll have to come and visit me. But yeah, that's definitely my joy this season too. And Will, how about you? What's your joy?
Well, I also love flowers and plants. I think in the past on the podcast, I've talked about my garden, and so my peonies were amazing last year. They're not blooming yet in April, but I'm looking forward to them. But since you two were talking about flowers, I was thinking of things that bring me joy. There's this flower. It's called the butterfly pea flower, and if you brew it into tea, the tea kind of is a pH meter. It will react to the pH of other things you put it in by changing color. So it starts off as this very kind of dark blue, but if it hits something acidic like lime juice in a cocktail, it changes to a more kind of pinkish, magenta-y kind of hue. And so there have been a few theme parties. Sandy's been at some where I've employed that. The tea party we had a few years ago, we used some of that where you add it to a Moscow Mule, and then there's this beautiful color change. Nice. You can also put it in ice cubes, and then as like ice cube melts, it gradually changes.
Oh, that's so fun.
For our space party, we had like a swirling galaxy, I think is what we called it. And it's just very, very beautiful.
That's so cool.
So we'll have to get Roman to do a special video project to show the viewers who are on the video to see how it works. But it always brings me joy just being able to play with color and see a little bit of chemistry, science kind of itching of the brain too. And then also, hey, cocktails.
Yeah, that's great. And also a little extra edge to it.
You know, so,
not just tea.
Yeah, since I already talked about garden flowers, I was like,
there you go.
butterfly pea flower, and you
pea
can get it
flower.
easily everywhere, like Amazon and so on, to make tea for these fun color change cocktails.
Very cool.
Nice.
Very cool. Love that.
All right, so having shared our joys, let's get into our main topic, our
Yeah.
discussion topic. So, Sandy talked about a few great things in their two previous episodes, which were a lot of fun. And so I left it up to them. I was like, hey, Sandy, what do you want to talk about? And they thought about it a bit and got back to us. And where we're kind of starting is the idea of kind of joy and curiosity.
Yes.
And so please, Sandy,
Yes.
take it away.
Well, and this goes so well with the theme of spring anyway, which I didn't even plan. It was just a happy accident of growth, right? Because, I like to think that all of us humans that really give a crap are on a journey of growth.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes when we think of growth as it has to be hard, it has to be negative, it has to be, laborious, and that it can't have joy or fun or lightness in it. And so, and that comes up a lot in the work, I think, of inclusion and growing and identifying your unintentional biases. And I've seen a couple of common reactions when I'm working with people on this topic. And one of the things that comes up the most is guilt. When you uncover an unintentional bias and you then have that realization that you've been a part of that, you've been perpetuating it unintentionally, of course, that you feel guilt. And guilt is not necessarily bad, right? Guilt can move us to action. Guilt can do lots of other things. But one of the things that I see that sometimes happens is that people get immobilized by the guilt, and then it becomes shame. And as as one of my Black friends told me, white guilt never did anything for a Black person,
Right. 100%.
or
You're
another or any other person that is underprivileged or oppressed. So the thing that I want to try to encourage people to do, and myself included, because I'm on this growth journey as well, is that every time we uncover an unintentional bias, that we can reframe it to be excited that we've discovered something, the joy of discovery, and the feeling like it's like you're digging for gold, as opposed to oh no, I found this other, you're trash, right? Exactly, right. So that it's this feeling of oh, cool, I brought this thing to my awareness, and now I can do something about it.
Exactly.
Because when it was unintentional and I wasn't looking at it and I didn't know, then I didn't know, and I was perpetuating it. So there's that side of it.
And if you hit the point where you're done growing, what else do you have in life?
Right.
Because we're never done, right?
We're never
Yes.
done growing.
Right?
Absolutely.
So it's discovering a new opportunity to grow,
Exactly.
discovering room to grow, and making that a joyful thing. And you know, it's joy and kind of that positive approach that is able to sustain effort over time.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Because
Yes.
if you're just doing something because of guilt, and I agree, guilt can start motivating change. Shows me, I wish I hadn't done that, so let's do
Right.
better. But if you get stuck with it and it becomes that shame, that's not moving forward. That's sinking deeper and deeper.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what happens then from a clinical perspective, right, is that we start to make self-evaluations, right? It's not just shame, but then that has something to do with I'm a terrible person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
Exactly.
all of a sudden we start to make these value judgments on who we are as a person rather than this is a thing that I did, right? And here's this thing that I can address rather than making this false equivalence to who this trait, this characteristic that you have, right? No, it's a thing, it's a behavior, it's a thought. We talked about intrusive thoughts last episodes, right? We have these intrusive thoughts and sometimes we act on them, but that doesn't mean you are this person,
Yes,
that
exactly.
you are a terrible person. That there's these evaluations. And once we start to go down that shame road, that's where it leads us.
Yeah. And I think that I've seen that with people because they do care so much. People who feel a lot of empathy are a lot of the people who are yes, I want to be a better person. And then those people that feel deep empathy feel it so deeply, then they feel so bad of what they've done before and everything else. And then they just get stuck in that. So I think it's a really good practice. And I try to do it with myself as well, that when I uncover another unintentional bias to feel joy and excitement so that we can we can address it and change.
Yeah, and another thing that the word that we use, unintentional, really sets you up for that, because it's well that was unintentional. Well, what would my intentions have been?
Right.
And so that's where it's setting up for this joy and this growth, because you can be like, I would not be the sort of person that would intend that. What am I the sort of person, or what sort of thing would I intend?
Right.
And so then you can separate kind of the mistake from your sense of self, to echo some of what Amber was saying. Yeah.
And I think it's contagious. I think
That's
that
deeply
when
agree.
we're in an environment where we're inspiring each other to change, instead of like guilt trafficking, if that's even a thing, but you know what I mean? Like, oh, well, don't say that, that's horrible. Or you said that thing and now that really, blah, blah, blah. As opposed to this feeling between us of, hey, I think you'll be really, I'm really excited to know that I caught, I caught this.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm sure that you want to change it. And it's this, like, we're encouraging each other to grow, as opposed to, you did this thing to me, you said that thing, that it's just infectious, either for good or for bad.
It reminds me of something that I've learned a lot from Amber that she likes to say a lot. So sorry if I'm swiping it, but calling people in versus calling people out.
Right.
So kind of inviting, like, hey, these are things we all unintentionally do maybe sometimes. And together we can work on it. Together we can move forward, rather than you're awful. You said an awful thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that comes up a lot with me with my pronouns. So, especially people that knew me before I came out as non-binary, they would say, like, they'll go, oh my gosh, I just realized I saw you the other day and I misgendered you, blah, 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 blah. And I'll say, my response to them is always, good catch.
Yeah.
I'm like, well done. Good catch.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll say, now practice it at least 3 times today to your cat, your dog, the TV, your partner, your friend, whatever. But good catch. And that, I think, is just such a better way for us to reframe the way we do it for ourselves, for everyone else. Because we all are trying to do our best.
Absolutely.
So that's the first thing that I wanted to go for.
And it also reminds me of earlier in this season, we talked about listening humbly. And that, I think that means something both to ourselves as well as to others, right? Is being able to, like, receive the feedback in a joyful way and a non-defensive way. Because again, especially people who really do care, then all of a sudden, if somebody even is trying to call them in, it's like, well, did you think I'm not doing that? Like, of course I'm thinking about it. Like, this was just a mistake, or I didn't intend that. Exactly. You didn't intend it. And it still happened. That's okay. So let's go back to what the intent was, and not I think sometimes the defensiveness comes in when we overemphasize my intent and not the impact. So like, okay, the impact happened, but if you really didn't intend that, let's address it, right? Let's fix the miss here, and we don't have to be defensive about it. We can listen humbly and say, like, oh, this was totally unintentional. Right. I would never want this to happen, and it still happened. So, like, how can I shift and find that joyful, right? Like, oh, this is never something that I want to do. I never want somebody to feel this way when they interact with me, or I don't want that to be how I come off, or I don't want to make that miss. So I'm really glad that this was pointed out, right? Whether to myself or somebody else pointed it out to me, that, like, man, now I can realign my behavior and what I'm doing with my intentions and not overemphasizing one or the other.
I love that. Humbly listening. That is just, I love that. And I think one of the ways that is helpful too, as far as verbiage that can be used between people who are trying to be supportive of each other, is when someone says something that's not appropriate or not okay, that the other person can say, ouch, if it's something that affected you, the ouch and oops, which I love. Ouch, what you said hurt my feelings. I'm going to give you a second chance to rephrase that. Or oops, what you said was not okay. So I'm going to give you another chance to rephrase that. So that it's just this more relational way that we're correcting each other, because we're all on this journey together. Right. So that, I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I really like the oops. I use that one a lot too. And even if it is an ouch for me, I will often use oops. Like, oh, I know that wasn't an accident. And like, well, let's use this.
You know that was an accident.
That's what. Is that what I said?
It sounded like you said wasn't.
Oh no, I know that wasn't. I know you did that on purpose. And like, oops, I know you did that. I know that was an accident. Right. Let's I think you meant this, right? Or remember we talked about they. Yeah. Remember they. Yeah. And often that happens, again, pronouns I think is a really great example. And especially when I'm working with my students, and I'll hear that, right? And that person's not in the room, and they'll misgender, or they'll use the wrong pronouns, and coming back and like, oops, I know it was an accident. Remember, it's they. Right. Oh, right. And it'll still happen, and then they'll start to catch themselves. Right. But like really being intentional and calling, it wasn't an accident. I know you weren't trying to do harm or trying to misgender somebody. Yeah. Oops. Let's fix that.
Exactly. And I will also say too that the emotional reaction that we have with the guilt and shame, it's important for us to remember that we're then framing what other oppressed communities have gone through in ourselves. We are taking it away from what they have been through and making it about us, which like, ooh. That's not so good. Yes. So I think that's that's kind of an underlying thing that we can just think about of like, well, I really want to do good. Yeah. So the other reaction that I've experienced quite a bit too is the defensiveness. The really the very emotional, very knee-jerk defensiveness to think of like, no. And that to me, it's really common. It's a protective measure, right? That our brain is sending out. Yep. That emotional reaction, especially when it's something that we're not directly experiencing. So when I'm talking to somebody who is not from the LGBTQ community, is not a person of color, they're not whatever, and they have an emotional reaction to something that I'm saying about inclusion. Right. And I'm always kind of, wow, okay, tell me more about that. That's a really strong emotional reaction to something that doesn't have any impact on your life, actually impact you, which to me indicates that that's really more about societal programming. If they've not had experience with people in that have experienced these oppressive situations or whatever, and they're having that strong of an emotional reaction, that tells me that is not their own belief that they've examined, that they've had experiences that have influenced, that it's just societal programming. Yeah. And so if folks who feel a really strong reaction to it, all of us, I do this too. When I feel a knee jerk, I have to stop. Yeah. And the best thing to do is get curious as opposed to digging your heels in and entrenching yourself. Nope. Yep. I'm vehemently opposed to that thing that has no impact on my life.
And I have a little mnemonic that I wanted to toss in there for that idea of getting curious. Get curious, not furious.
Right.
And that was given to me by an attendee at one of my trainings related to some of this kind of stuff. Get curious, not furious.
Yep. Oh my God, I love that.
And angry, frustrated reaction. You're right. That is societal programming, or as we often like to cultural inertia, or habits. Yeah. So your habits get kind of programmed into you, and your brain likes your habits to go unimpeded. Yep. And when something is disrupting a mental or behavioral habit, like imagine you're folding laundry, it's something you're really good, easy to do, and something's getting in the way, or you're not able to do it the way you usually do it. You start feeling frustrated, right? Exactly the same thing is what you're describing. When your habits and your automatic way of kind of thinking and doing things is disrupted by these new ideas or new perspectives, it creates a frustrated emotional reaction. Yeah. And so then you have these folks like you're describing who are then kind of lashing out about it. But really it's showing like exactly as you said. It's the societal programming that has been put into play getting disrupted. That is a necessary step disrupt if we want to disrupt these things.
Right.
So
Right.
I try to teach people to recognize that and
Right.
say, oh, this is why it's happening.
Yeah.
And then kind of redirect that frustrated feeling. Instead of directing it at Sandy, who's telling me something I didn't want to hear, direct it at the societal norms.
Yeah.
Say, oh gosh, I'm mad that society
Right.
is such that I was programmed this way in the first place.
Right.
Turn that frustrated feeling into positive action.
Yeah, and absolutely dig into the topic. Whatever it is that you're frustrated about or that you feel that anger about, that clearly means, if it's societal programming, that you haven't had enough exposure to the people who've been affected and what their experiences are. So read, listen to podcasts, dig into it so that you
your
can
own
really,
education.
and
Yep.
then that curiosity is what helps us grow.
Yeah.
And, those very visceral emotional reactions are information.
Absolutely.
They're not truth.
Yeah.
And I think
Yes.
sometimes
Really good.
people get really confused by that. This deeply held belief of mine, which
Yeah.
is not really yours, it was given to you
was
by
given to you.
society, is so important to me. And my feelings of passion and anger are truth. They're not. They're not
Yeah.
truth. They're information
Absolutely.
that you've uncovered,
Yeah.
a deep-seated part of your programming.
Absolutely.
So I think when you look at it that way, it can really help you to stop. I'm not being attacked by this person. I'm actually having some information given to me so I can change.
That's really good.
And so this isn't just an LGBTQ plus related
No,
thing,
not
but
at all.
but there is something specific to the LGBT community I think is useful here, and that's the idea of coming out. So your point about kind of, well, was this a deep seated belief, something you really endorse? LGBT folks have to figure out that kind of gender norms, sexual orientation, that what society has told them they are, that's not right for me. And that's the coming out process. We have to figure out our orientation and decide, oh, I'm throwing off some of these societal norms. So we, by nature of being out at all, have gone through this process. Whereas heterosexual people, sometimes they do. Sometimes they have experiences where they realize that kind of some of the societal norms aren't for them, even though they are heterosexual. But by nature of being a heterosexual, they don't necessarily have to go through
Correct.
that. And so I see this play out in lots of ways. Like LGBTQ people, by and large, break a lot of norms in fashion and how we express ourselves, things that don't technically have anything to do with our actual sexual orientation or gender identity per se, maybe gender expression. But we break norms a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's in part because we have gone through this process of questioning norms related to our sexuality and orientation and gender.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good point. One of the indications, I think, of being in in that kind of untested, right?
Untested assumptions.
Untested person. If you're like, well, I have not had a lot of challenges that have tested me that. Look at the people that you hang around with.
Yeah.
Because I will often talk to people and ask them like, so tell me about your friend group. Tell me about the people around you. Because if they're all people that are like you,
look and think
the
act.
same, no wonder
Right.
this is such a challenging thing for you. And not that I'm like, oh, poor baby, this is so hard for you. Not that, but just like, hey,
It's just a simple reality.
if you've surrounded yourself unintentionally by people that look exactly like you and think the same things that you do, and then you hear something opposed to that and you get really angry. Well, let's get curious, kids.
Yeah. Well, then it goes back to some of our skills around broadening our input and being really intentional about like, okay, how can I hear different narratives? And I talked a lot about that in decolonizing too, is like, can I start to hear maybe narratives and stories and experiences that aren't majority culture, the ones that I'm very familiar with, right? I know this story. I know this narrative. Can I hear somebody else's experience with it? Can I hear somebody else's lived world and experience and narrative so that I can broaden kind of my understanding of people? And even, I think as an example, for me, I grew up in a fairly conservative Christian space, and I went to a religiously affiliated Christian school from elementary through grad school. I went to, and it was very much in that space. And there were certain things, and like my exposure, like It's very different because I had I had exposure to LGBTQ plus folks. However, a lot of my just life, day-to-day life, was not exposed. And so really being very intentional, like saying, I know I get a very specific message here. And I want other people in my life, and being very intentional about broadening my experience, broadening who is part of my friend group, who I follow, who is part of my life, so that I have a very different reaction and response than it was maybe modeled for me based on my spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the terms some people use for this is homophily. Like, so you spend your time or you have affiliations with people who are who by default are similar to you. And it tends to be, if we're not examining these things, we tend to make friends with. We think we will have more in common with someone who's very similar to us.
Yeah.
And that then can result in having these environments like Sandy was describing, where everyone around you is just like you. And so being intentional about reaching out, which you both already said, but also seeking out those opportunities. It's not necessarily that every person who's different from you are going to become best friends, but being open to it. I think of this in terms of like inviting people to parties, for instance. You know, when I go to social media and I'm setting up an event and I'm like, who do I invite? There's the usual suspects. But you know, you start thinking like, oh, I'm inviting so-and-so, and oh yeah, our mutual friend is so-and-so. But then there are people kind of at the outskirts that maybe don't have as many connections with the other people you're thinking of. And so I always try to be very intentional, like, who am I forgetting? Looking through the list and seeing where else can I bring in new perspectives? Because frankly, social environments are more fun when it's like, oh, someone sees something different than me. They're bringing something different that I might not have thought of.
And it makes our life richer.
Absolutely.
It makes our life so much richer to have those different people in our lives.
That diverse joy.
Yes. I love it.
Awesome. Well, do you have anything more on this before we take a little break and then get into story time?
No, I think I'm
wonderful.
Said what I want to say.
All right. So everyone, remember to find the joy in discovering room to grow.
Yes.
Like, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
I love that message. Thank you, Sandy.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, so we'll take a little break and we'll be right back. Welcome back from a little break. All right, so we're gonna have some story time, and Sandy brought some stories for us.
I did.
So we always do one more negative story and one more positive story. Also, I want to remind the listeners: send your stories into us, please. We will share them anonymously, of course. Won't put in any identifying information, but we have a whole battery of stories that we like to go through, and we love hearing from you. So please go to diversejoy.com and send them in. But Sandy, so what are your stories?
Yeah. So I have spent a lot of time working in industries that are mostly straight white male dominated. So in financial services.
I was going to say, with wealth management, they're also like a different level of privilege and power that comes with that too.
And then I walked in and they're like, what?
They're like, who is this? In all your color.
Exactly. But doing a lot of speaking engagements for financial services and being in front of, all of these various groups of men, all wearing white shirts, oftentimes, which is interesting. And there was this guy that came up after one of the big talks that I had done, and I could just tell when he was standing in line to greet me that he was like
very eager,
fitting,
very eager,
fitting to fight. He just really wanted to debate me.
Was ready,
and he was ready, right?
Working himself
and it was working himself up about accepting, and the message was about accepting or being welcoming and inclusive of
What's the fight about?
to people that aren't like you in the workplace. Because especially that workplace in financial services is so difficult to be a diverse person. And so he came up to me and he was like, out of the gate, wanted to have this debate, because his religious beliefs told him, you know, that being queer is a sin and that blah, blah. And he was just going at me. And I was like, whoa, dude. And I stopped him and I said, well, first we got to have if we're going to have this conversation for real. And I don't have to, by the way. You've like kind of ambushed me, and this is neither the time or the place. But if we're going to have it, and I allow it, that to be a part of that, we need to have some ground rules. And we need to agree to the fact that all people are of equal value and that all value systems have merit. And so that your values are to you very important, but my values are to me are also important and are equal. And so that was something that was, he was not able to adhere to either of those things. In fact, he kept bringing up points and I'm like, well, you just went to the all humans are not of equal value thing. So and that kind of kept happening. And so the negative experience there was that I had to draw a lot of boundaries with this guy, and it was just clear that he was just not. He was wouldn't respect. He was never respecting that.
It is a negative story, and I'm sorry that you had that experience. I also think that it's positive in the sense that you were able to draw those boundaries and then adhere to them for yourself and say, you know what, like this is not, we're not having this conversation because you are unable to respect the boundaries that I'm drawing. And we talked about that in another episode too, that like, just because somebody is bringing something to you doesn't mean that that's the time that you have to have that conversation.
Exactly.
Nor are you, especially when somebody is coming at you and it has something to do with you personally or is attacking or anything like that. Like you have the opportunity to draw those boundaries and take care of yourself. That you don't have to put yourself in harm's way in order to try to teach somebody, even if you're in a position as a teacher, right? Like even if I'm coming in as a speaker for a workshop, or I'm the director of diversity, or I'm the teacher for this course, I don't have to put myself in harm's way because you are unable to respect the boundaries that I'm putting in place. And I think that that's really important, particularly for marginalized folks, to recognize that, like, yes, of course we want people to move forward. Yes, of course we want to have commonality. We want to have conversation. We want to engage in difficult dialogue. And it does not have to come at the cost of your own self, physical, emotional, spiritual, whatever wellness. It does not have to come at the cost of you being harmed.
And I like that word costs, because the way I think of it is your time, your energy have value.
Absolutely.
And you do not need to spend it on someone who won't respect the boundaries. And you know, as a wealth management person, he should understand that.
Well, okay.
That's a whole other talk, actually.
All right. Yeah, I'm not sure we have time.
It's an analogy. It was a joke. But it has value, and you don't have to give it away to something that would be wasteful.
Yeah, it's not. It's taken me years to realize it's not my responsibility to teach every single person. And people have to be willing to change. That's really the biggest thing that anyone has to have to be on this journey. And some people are just not on the journey with us. And that guy, he was just not on the journey with us. He was just very upset at my existence, being there on stage and listening to me. So, you know, oh well.
Unfortunate. It's unfortunate. Yeah.
Well, we also always pair it with a more positive story. Do you have one that can lift us back up? Someone who is on the journey?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I generally see happen that unfortunately the guy that I just spoke about was not one of those people. But a lot of times when I'm doing workshops and we're talking through things and people, unfortunately, I have to say, it was another, white guy, said it was just very, very upset about the discussion that we were having. It was challenging his unintentional biases, and he had a very emotional response to it. And it was one of those situations where I see a lot where it's like, oh, this has really gotten under his skin, and he's talking about it and with the other people. And I'm like, he's really stepping forward to change. Like I can see that. It's like an indication when they're like, no, and they're still in the discussion, and they're still responding to the boundaries, and they're really talking about it. That means that they're really moving forward to change. So this guy was really upset, and he had even left me a nasty, what do you call it? The review. review. No, the reviews. Yeah. You know, and you
Yeah.
always get like, you know, his presenters get our reviews and he like, I knew it was him. I knew it was this guy, right? And he wrote me this like, oh, this was crap and blah, blah, blah. And then like 6 months, maybe 8 months later, I got an email from this guy saying that he was so grateful for my patience with him and that he's really learned from that situation. And that was the catalytic moment for him was this, and that he wasn't just shut down by, you know, shut up, you're wrong, but that we had created this environment that he could express himself, but then grow. And that he had. So that was my positive story because, you know, and I was like, hey, could you tell the people that you left the review with that that I don't actually suck? Thank you.
That I'm not actually terrible. Yeah.
Hopefully you did.
Yeah.
Oh,
I really appreciate that.
One had a more positive ending.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you know, we're all part of various people's journeys, and it's nice to know that sometimes we don't, you know, he wrote to you, but there are probably a lot of other people who also had a positive turn and you never got to hear about it. And
it ties to the first story a little bit for me because I think about that even if in that moment we're not seeing the change.
Right.
But by virtue of us holding boundaries, by virtue of us being who we are and how we're interacting, how we're engaging in these conversations, even if they're not responding in that moment, it's planting these seeds.
Yeah.
And that can be watered by multiple different people and other experiences and interactions that then come to fruition later on. And then like all of a sudden it's like, oh, that thing that person said that I was so reactive to, I get it now.
Yeah, I kind of wish that I had kept touch with that guy from the first story just to see where he is now. Maybe he's in the same place. Maybe he's now heading up an organization that's like, I don't know, fighting the rights of LGBTQ people. I have no idea. But my hope is that there
maybe he was secretly gay and you helped him come out.
Exactly, because you know, why are you so angry about something that doesn't affect you? Yeah. He thinks the lady does protest. So just saying. But you never know what kind of things, I mean, and at the very least, I think about those folks, they're thinking about it. Like whatever we took their snow globe and I shook it and they're still thinking about it, which when you think of, you know, like that's impact, right? Right. So you don't always know where it goes, but you just have to throw it out there and with blessings and
I also think about, you know, what did he think he was going to get out of that confrontation? And by you setting boundaries and keeping them, you know, maybe you also spared some other LGBT person from having the same conversation because he was expecting to get you to admit that you were wrong or I don't know, whatever it was. And he didn't get that satisfaction and you set those boundaries. And so someone else who he might have kind of victimized or attacked, he doesn't do it because his experience with you didn't give him what he thought.
If he needed, if he thought he was gonna like convince me that I'm not a human of equal value to him, you know,
or to change,
sorry,
change your identity in some way.
Ain't gonna happen.
And this is something Amber and I talk about a lot, and I've mentioned once or twice, at least in previous episodes. You know, we don't want to make it everyone's responsibility to do all the education, which you already said. But you know, not everyone has the energy, has it within them to set those boundaries. But when you find that, when you do have that, and you're able to set those boundaries for yourself, at least, you know, it can have these downstream consequences and protect others. Do some of this education so that others don't have to, And that comes up a lot too. People are like, well, I want to have this conversation with this diverse person, and they don't want to talk to me. And how am I supposed to learn? Like, okay, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of resources out there. Listen to this podcast.
Exactly. It's not the job of the diverse person to teach you everything.
And in fact, just to expand story time a little, but also it'll actually lead into the question. One of our episodes in season 1 with you, we talked about a variety of transgender, non-binary related issues. And my dad, hey dad, love you, actually came to me right before that episode came out. And someone he had worked with for many years had come out as trans, and he was like, what are some talking points? Like, what do I need to know? And I was like, number one, just, you know, respect them, accept the gender that they're telling you they are. And I was like, and listen to our episode coming out in 2 days, because we went through all all of those
Yeah.
things. And so thank you for being willing and able to have that conversation. And also from that wonderful episode, everyone check it out. Season 1, learning about trans and non-binary identities with special guest Sandy Eichel. It was a great episode, and it inspired some people to send in questions building on some of the stuff we had talked
cool.
about. So if
Nice.
we're okay moving to question time.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
So there were at least 2, and I'm going to kind of merge them. But this is in the realm of talking about pronouns and so on. One person asked, does it make sense to just use they as a pronoun for pretty much everyone until you know better or know differently, know their actual pronouns? And related to that, someone, this was half a comment, half a question, but they said that, a lot of the ways they do this is trying to avoid pronouns generally and just use the person's name. So instead of needing to say, if I'm talking about Sandy as though they weren't here, like, oh, they're a wealth management advisor, so on and so on. Oh, Sandy is a,
Yes.
because if you're putting the name, you're not allowing that kind of ambiguity or the room for the same mistakes.
Right.
So that's a jumping off point. What do you think about the kind of using they in general and the name, and how do you feel about that?
I love it. In fact, I'm practicing that on a regular basis in my life with everyone I see or encounter, not assuming that what their pronouns are.
Right.
I think we're so programmed to put everybody in a box, right? And we see a person that has long hair and, breasts that are more developed and assume that person is female. We have no idea what their gender identity is, what and who they are. And so when you're looking at just people walking down the street, assuming and using they in your mind is a great practice until you know what their gender identity is and their pronouns. They is always a safe bet. And I greatly appreciate that as a non-binary person. When it's hard to even explain how wonderful it is when you hear someone repeatedly use the correct pronouns when they're talking to you and about you. And like, I really,
Validating.
it's so validating and it feels so great. And the opposite doesn't feel great. So I think it's a great practice to use they until you know otherwise. And, even the way we look at people that we may never talk to.
Right. Well, what it does is it trains your brain to change the way in which you speak too, right? Like, so in every way. So whether you're doing it internally, like I see somebody coming at me, regardless of how their gender expression is or what they might look like, if I use the they in my head, then I'm more likely to speak it that way as well. But it makes me ask a question about my own self, right? So in my own practice, moving toward myself, and I have a few other colleagues who are cis female women who have started to adopt, even like on our name tags or in our email byline, or when we're our pronoun pins, or in our introductions, to use like she they as saying like you can use they them pronouns to describe me, and that's totally fine for me as well. But I sit in the tension of like, that feels good for me. It feels fitting for me. And it's not necessarily my gender identity either. And so I wonder, like, how does that sit for you? And not that you speak for all non-binary and trans folks, but to hear
we have
that.
the polls just in.
That's just
all non-binary people.
have
all of
elected
them.
That's
Sandy
right.
as
You're welcome.
as their token person. But what is that? How does that sit for you? Or hearing that as a cis person to identify as she, they.
Is it an appropriation?
Is it an appropriation? Is it okay?
It doesn't feel appropriate to me. What it feels to me is it opens the door.
Yeah.
It first of all lets people who do identify as not either what their, sex was assigned at birth or something that is in the non-binary umbrella. It opens the door for people to see that you are a safe person when it comes to pronouns, that you've thought about it, that if you're you're she, they, and you're saying, look, your pronouns are safe with me. And you're, and you are safe with me. So I feel like it opens the door to that. And I think that, fantasy world, we live in a place where none of us have binary
Right.
pronouns. Everyone just is what they, whatever they are and what they express. And we don't refer to anyone in these boxes since so many of us are, not one or the other, or we're gender fluid or whatever. So I think it's great. I think it's a great practice. I really do.
Yeah, I appreciate that because, like I said, it's one of those things that I sit in the tension. I'm like, well, it feels good for me, but I also want to be really mindful that I'm not, doing something that then doesn't feel good to somebody else, or it feels like I'm, trying to be part of a community that isn't my identity or something. And so hearing like, okay, at least in some folks' perspective that like that does feel accepting and that it's inviting. And that's always my heart personally. And I know that's the heart of some of my colleagues who also do something very similar and put like she, her, they, them, or she, they. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you. I love it.
So, well, thank you to the folks who sent in those questions and comments, and all the rest of you. Please send in your comments, questions you'd like us to discuss on the podcast, ideas for future episodes. Because we spend a while planning, each season, and would love to hear stuff that you want us to talk about more. So you can do all that at diversejoy.com.
Awesome. Do we want to go straight into our habit breaking skill, or do we want to take a quick break?
I'm looking at our producer, the lovely Roman Binding.
Okay.
We'll be back after this. Hey, everyone. We now have Diverse Joy merch available for purchase. There are Diverse Joy mugs that are dishwasher and microwave safe, some really nice large tote bags that are great for grocery shopping, very cozy embroidered hoodies, and a variety of comfy t-shirts. I was wearing one of the t-shirts in the airport recently, and several people stopped me to say how happy it made them to see it. People are hungry for joy around diversity topics, so get some merch and help us spread the joy. There are also free downloadable bingo cards if you want to play Diverse Joy Bingo with our common topics and phrases. Get all of these at biashabit.com/store, or just go to diversejoy.com and click the store link. All proceeds go toward helping us produce the show, and you can also make a donation to our nonprofit through the site to help us out even more. Now, back to the show.
Awesome. So welcome back from break.
Welcome back from break, everybody.
So Will, and Sandy, that every episode we do a habit breaking skill. So what is our skill today?
So when we look at that kind of habit breaking model, we have the motivation, awareness, tools, and effort. And the tools are things that you kind of reach for to start doing the work of breaking these habits. But also,
Will, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Can you just tell us the acronym for the model? Because I don't think we've actually mentioned the actual name, the acronym.
Well, so it's motivation M. Awareness, tools, effort. So mates. I had one colleague who was like, you could do something like checkmate bias or something.
That.
I've never, but if you need help, remember that.
Mate. I know I respond very well to having the acronym names. And you've said it several times, and our first episode was the model itself, but we haven't actually talked about mate. So anyway,
so we're looking at that mate. This is part of that T. And the tools we reach for to work on reducing bias is something we talk about a lot under the skills section. But there are also tools that people tend to think will be a good idea that actually backfire. We've done one or two of them in earlier episodes this season, but the one for today, the ineffective tool is having too strong a belief in your personal objectivity. And so our skill is to not do that. So don't have too strong a belief in your personal objectivity. And something we've talked about in almost every episode probably is we're not objective perceivers of reality. These biases influence how we see things, how we process information. The main discussion topic we were having today, that there's these unexamined societal programming that influences how we perceive things. And they're not objective, they're subjective. We're subjective beings. This is how we exist. And this becomes a problem because there are some people that are like, all right, I don't want to be biased, right? Being biased is the bad thing. What's the opposite of being biased? Well, it's being objective.
Right.
And so people will say, well, I'm just going to be objective when making this decision.
Right.
I'm an objective person.
Yeah.
There are also certain professions where objectivity is very prized. And sometimes people incorporate that into their identity a little too much and end up thinking of themselves as very objective.
Yes.
Like, for instance, judges, scientists.
Yep.
I'm not excluding my profession. When objectivity is something that's important, they start seeing it as part of their identity. 100%. But what that means is they think of themselves as objective.
Yes.
They don't question whether they're objective.
Yeah.
And then when they get a question about the objectivity, that's
They
where
might have these
frustration
reactions.
and defensive
Like
reactions.
Sanders-
Curiosity.
Yes, get curious, not curious.
Curious.
Yeah, and so some of the researchers, Ullman and Cohen, who did some of the research showing how this just does not work. I really love the title of one of their papers, and I think it's just catchy and memorable, where they showed that thinking of yourself as objective leads to these problems. And the initial part of the title was, I think it, therefore it is true.
Yes.
And so imagine you're this person, you think of yourself, I'm an objective person.
Yeah.
Well, when thoughts pop to your mind, well, those are objective
Those
thoughts,
are
right?
objective.
Because they're a part of
I'm
me.
correct. Yeah.
And what we know is the thoughts that pop into your mind very often will be stereotypes, biases, systemic programming, exactly, cultural inertia.
Absolutely.
One of our, that's going to be a new diverse joy bingo for
Cultural
Square.
inertia.
Cultural inertia. And so that's what ends up happening. And this is what the research shows, that when you think of yourself as objective, you actually end up showing more bias because you're not questioning things
Yeah,
as
believe
much.
that.
Yeah.
We're much better served by accepting the fact that we are not objective perceivers of reality. The thoughts that pop into our head are not necessarily objective, and they're not even necessarily who we are.
Right.
It can be this societal programming. And so don't and I'm going to look to Amber for a little help in phrasing this right, because it's more of a therapy thing. Yeah. But like don't be attached to the thoughts that are popping into your mind. So this is a mindfulness kind of idea, right? Do you wanna...
Well, I think you said it beautifully. Not to be overly attached to the thoughts that come in, right? And it makes me think of a lot of times in clinical work, I'll talk about research. It's not specifically around bias, but it is that we're really bad self-evaluators, right? Like the research shows that we are either say that we're terrible or we say that we're really good, and we're actually not either one. Right? We're not really great and we're not really terrible, but we're just really bad at gauging who or where we are on certain things, and our skill level or behavior, different things, or impact. And so being able to step back and say, like, let me examine the thoughts. Let me examine these things and not overly attach our emotions, our reactions, our behaviors to the first thought that comes into my mind. Yeah.
Like some people or most people at some time or another, they tend to think of the voice in their head as that's who I am. That's me talking. But it's really the words that pop into your head come from a lot of places.
A lot of places. Yeah.
So if you, I'm just rephrasing what we were already saying. Yeah. But in bias-specific situations, people who are encouraged to think that they're objective show more bias than people who don't, which is the exact opposite. Intentional, right?
Power.
And so I always encourage people, and this is what I do as a scientist and as a person, think of objectivity. It can be something that you're striving for. You want things to be more objective, less subjective. That's valid, but it's something to always be striving for, always to put checks and balances in on it, which is what we do as scientists, the peer review process. It's, I'm a scientist, I've done a research study, I think I've made it as objective as possible, but then you have other people evaluating and say, oh, maybe you didn't think of this. Maybe you need another research study to prove this other thing. That's why we have the scientific method.
Right.
Yes.
And so not having a belief in your personal objectivity, but objectivity to have something that you're always questioning and striving for, finding better ways to do things.
That's really good.
Nice.
That's really good. I like that a lot.
Awesome.
That's great.
Any other thoughts to share on that before we move forward?
No, I mean, I keep having this thought that keeps coming to my
Please,
mind.
share.
And it's related as related to it, but thinking about like cognitive behavioral therapy,
Sure.
a lot of times we'll talk about those our automatic thoughts, right? And that's the place where we're questioning it. And I work with kids, so I use lots of acronyms in kid friendly ways, but it's ANTS, which is automatic negative thoughts. So like the ants in your pants. And so I keep coming back to that of like, what are the ants in my pants? And not just like letting them roost, but like, let me actually like get them out or examine them and think about them. Take your pants off. But allow like recognizing that these automatic thoughts don't necessarily belong there, right? Like your ants in your pants don't belong there. Right. So let's examine them and see what we need to actually look at, like what we actually need to do with this. And so I don't know why, but it just keeps coming into my mind as like, it's my own intrusive thoughts, but like, but the ants of thinking about like, what are these ants that are coming in? Right. And that's not totally objective. I mean, maybe there's something here that is true and something that I want to hold on to. And also maybe this is something that I need to re-examine.
Yeah. The self-talk. I was thinking that the whole time you were saying is that self-talk is either it's the shame, pride, teeter-totter. It's the like, I'm so horrible, ugly, whatever, or I'm so great and wonderful. And like, and like get off the teeter-totter because that self-talk is so not conducive to growth. And it's not, like we said before, it's not truth. It's just information. But we often have those voices that are not our own. There are parents, there are society, there are whatever. And, it's important for us to question them. Because like, I don't know who you are.
Right. Where did this voice come from?
And this is expanding to kind of understanding like how our brains and minds work. But as another analogy for this kind of thing, think about getting a song stuck in your head. Right. Does the song get stuck in your head because you're trying to have that? Because that's you heard it and then it gets kind of caught on a loop. Some of these ants, automatic negative thoughts are exactly like that. Yep. There are lots of different ways that things can get into our heads, and we're never going to be aware of all of them.
Right.
And so, questioning.
Yeah, questioning. Absolutely.
And
love that.
To use terms we were using it's unintentional that these things are in your head. So think, what are my intentions? What do I want my actions to reflect? What do I want things to be?
And it's a practice.
It's a practice. Practice makes progress.
That's right.
There's no such thing as perfect, does not exist, but practice makes progress.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yay.
Excellent.
All right. So that was our skill.
Yeah.
All right.
That was great.
So as always, we've come up with this analogy this season that, diverse joy is a sandwich. Joy is the bread. There can be salty stuff in the middle.
That's right.
It's not all pure joy. There's salty stuff.
Chewy, crunchy stuff in there.
But our second piece of bread is always this joyful recommendation. And Sandy, you've thought of something that brings you joy that you think we can share with others.
I did. And I think it's perfect for spring too. I love this show that I think it was originally on BBC, but it's called Escape to the Chateau. And it's this lovely British couple who bought this French chateau that was in really poor shape. And there's 7 or 8 seasons. And it's them restoring this chateau. They host weddings there and celebrations there and everything else. And they've just got this attitude that I want to embody more in my life. They just have a go. They'll just try something that they've never done before. Yeah. And they'll just figure it out. And they don't seem to, maybe they do it off camera and that's fine with me because I don't want to see it. But they seem to just have this attitude of we're just going to try this. We're going to do this thing. And they're just going to, and it inspires me to try new things. And it's also a beautiful show. Everything about visually. It is, visually and the things that they create. She's very artistic and he's an engineer and the two of them really complement each other. And anyway, I just love that show. It's the show that I watch when I'm really anxious or really stressed out or just not having a good day. And my wife, it's like my cartoon, like when you have children, you're like, do you want to watch that? My wife will say to me,
it's your comfort show.
Correct. Do you need to go watch Escape to the Chateau? And I'm like, I think that I need
an escape. I need an escape to Chateau.
It's on Peacock. So it's on the Peacock app. So check it out.
That's
they're no longer, they've wrapped a couple of years ago. They've decided to, raise their children children the rest of the years off
So
of
it's
camera.
so it's a reality show.
Yeah, but it's
Okay,
not
got
done
it.
like a. Yeah, it's not. I mean, when you hear reality show, you
Right,
think of like
but it's a
the
real
Housewives
it's a
or
real
something.
couple. It's a real
Yeah.
family.
Real
Yes.
chateau.
yes.
It's a real chateau.
Yeah.
So
Got
it sounds like
okay.
their chateau's kind of always a work in progress.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
like us and
Just
how
like
we always
us,
need to
right.
keep
They
working.
also have launched a podcast
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
called Dick and Angel's Chat.
Okay.
So
Shout out.
that's right to the Strawbridges. Shout out Dick and
Yes.
Angel. Love you. Mwah, mwah. So yeah, there you go.
Dick
love
and
it.
Angel's Chateau.
Chateau.
Because it's like-
oh, that's cute.
Because like chateau. Yeah, I get it.
That's
Oh,
cute.
That's adorable.
That is very cute.
All right. Well, hey, as long as you've already watched all of our episodes and recommended them to all your friends, then Dick and Angel's
Wow.
Chat.
Yes, exactly.
That's hilarious.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sandy.
well, thanks for having me again. It's so
I'm
fun.
so glad that you
Oh.
came
Great.
again. That's good.
So I am Dr. William Cox,
I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
and today's guest was
San Diego.
Diverse Joy is produced by Eric Roman Beining with music by Jay Arner. It is accessible as a video podcast on YouTube or an audio-only podcast wherever you get podcasts or at diversejoy.com. Also follow us at Diverse Joy on most social media platforms. If you enjoy the show, help us reach more people by leaving 5-star reviews or recommending it personally. The next time you're at a party and you maybe feel like you don't know what to say to someone, you can be like, hey, I was listening to this podcast. Tell them about it.
Diverse
'Cause
Joy.
that is the number one way that podcasts reach more people is from the listeners sharing them with people they know. So give us a shout out. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, and promote equity. All that good Jedi work. Learn more at biashabit.com. Thank you for joining us. Now go find your joy.
Bye.